Oh, goody.
Alright, what's up everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Mercenaries video. So in this one, I wanted to talk about the top 5 candidates for buffs out of all the 98 Mercenaries we have right now. If you didn't see, I did a tier list recently for PvP. I'll have a link to that in the description if you want to check it out. But basically, in the PvP tier list, the characters in the bottom tier, almost all of them were launch mercenaries. And I talked about it a bit in that video, but a lot of launch mercenaries are really balanced very differently. They were just a much lower power level, even relative to some of the characters that released at launch. But especially now that we've had a ton of different mercenaries enter the game, the power level has gone up significantly. And a lot of these launch mercenaries have kind of been left in the dust. They weren't really good enough when launch happened, when the power level was lower. And now that we have more options and the power level is much higher, there's really just no hope for these characters in their current form. And even if we get new support in these tribes and whatnot, I really don't think it's going to propel these characters up because they're just very limited by their current items and abilities. So we're going to talk about what I would like to see changed with these characters. I do want to give an honorable mention here before we get into it to Deathwing. Deathwing's a character that didn't make the top 5 because I don't think he's nearly as unplayable as the other 5 characters we're going to be talking about, but I do think he is a character that could warrant a buff, as I think he is a really cool character, but he really isn't seeing very much play at all. And I think a very simple change, and this is one that was actually talked about by one of the Mercenaries team members, Charles, was basically with his items. Basically, he said how one change he would kind of like to do, and maybe it's something we'll see in the future, who knows, is putting Deathwing's best item here, Heart of Unliving, which gives that extra 5 more damage and makes the attack affect adjacent enemies for the second part of the effect. He wanted that to just be kind of baked into Deathwing, as it's so much better than the other 2 abilities Deathwing has here that no one really picks these 2 at all. When you see Deathwing, he's almost always running this, and this item isn't so powerful on its own that it really warrants being used all the time. It's just that the other items are much less useful. So because of that, this one just gets run by default. So maybe if that was just kind of baked into the ability, then you could give Deathwing another interesting equipment and there would actually be a bit more variety in choice of what you go with for the item. Maybe you can do some fell shenanigans or some other stuff with him, but saw him mention that quite some time ago, so I did want to give that an honorable mention. Deathwing's not terrible, but I do think he could use a little bit of tweaking, and that would be a small thing that I think could make him a bit better of a character. But that's our honorable mention. We're going to get into the top 5 mercenaries I would like to see buffed, but before we do, if you enjoy this content, do remember to like and subscribe. There's a ton to help out the channel and keeps the Mercenaries videos coming. But let's dive right on into this. You might notice here that there is a trend. Like I mentioned, these are all launch mercenaries, but on top of that, they are actually mercenaries out of 2 specific tribes. And the first here is demons with jaraxxus. So jaraxxus, I think, is actually one of, if not the best character out of this this bunch of 5 we have here. But that by no means he is good. He just happens to be the best of the worst, so to speak. I really like jaraxxus as a character, and I would like to see more demon support and fell support for him, but right now it feels like he's just very underwhelming because kind of all the demons except for maybe Diablo are pretty bad. And so you really aren't able to leverage the fell synergy that he has, or he cares a lot about demon synergy, right? I think Fist of Jaraxxus here is definitely one of the cooler and more interesting abilities for him, where you're dealing 15 to a random enemy, and then it repeats for each of your other demons. You can also buff this up with more spell damage or fell damage, and he can kind of do that himself by summoning more demons and then pumping up the fel damage, and you can even run his fel equipment if you want to make it even more, so that'd be +5 fel damage, and that can actually be a lot, right? Like 20 to a random, that's 40 if it's critting. It's not terrible, right? Especially if you have a demon-focused team, but the problem is that the other demons just kind of roll over and die very quickly, so I don't know if there's an ability in particular I would like to see tweaked on Jaraxxus himself. I think he's a character that could actually just be a lot better if he had good supporting demons. But if I were to just buff him individually, I do think that giving a bit more damage to Legion Burst is not a bad way to go about doing it. Or maybe instead of increasing the damage, maybe this could also add a little bit of fel damage, so that way you don't have to rely on your Infernals staying alive in order to kind of get some fel synergy going. Because obviously the Infernals are cool and it's a neat idea to like up the damage, but if you're summoning an Infernal, then you can't be using one of his fel spells. And a lot of the times, your Inferno will end up dying on the next turn before you can really gain the impact from that additional fel damage. I mean, even if you have the fel core on, which I think is a fine equipment, it's just not really likely to survive to get like your combos off, especially because a lot of the other demons and even Jaraxxus's regular ability here is slower. So I do think adding some fel damage here could be good. Also lowering the speed. I think if you're going to have fel be a slower archetype, which is kind of the trend they seem to be going for, there needs to be better payoffs for going slow, because right now there aren't many at all, and there are none in the fel archetype that like give you an advantage for going slow. So maybe something along the lines of, if the character you hit this with already acts to deal critical damage or deal double damage or something like that. Just give us a reason for being slow to matter, or just make it so the archetype isn't slow for no reason. So those are some changes I would like to see to Jaraxxus. I do think like pretty much any one of those changes would be pretty solid. Also, honestly, I think you could probably get rid of the cooldown on Fist of Jaraxxus and it would not be overpowered. It's good. It could deal a lot of damage still. If you had, you know, a full demon comp, then you'd be dealing, what, like 45 damage, but that's also random damage, so it's not like you can target it. I do think random is enough of a downside to where that might just be fine on its own. Maybe you have to compensate for that with either a little bit less damage or a little bit slower speed, but that would fit into kind of the theme they're going for fel. So those are some of my ideas for Jaraxxus. We're going to move on here to Mutanus, the first Murloc. So these are all Murlocs and demons. These are the tribes that I think need the absolute most help. And Mutanus is a really cool character. He was actually buffed once already, and it just wasn't really enough. And the reason for that is, much like demons, Murlocs don't really have a lot of good tribal support. They do things with other Murlocs, kind of, sometimes, but Mutanus was a one-button mercenary, and that button was Scaly Taunt. You gain Taunt, take 5 less damage this turn, and most of the time, if you saw a Mutanus, was running Iridescent Necklace, so that way you're taking even less damage, and you cannot be critically damaged this turn. So I actually really like this ability. I think this is super cool. And like many metas ago, I was trying him out in place of like Cornelius as a way to like protect your team and whatnot. The problem is this character doesn't really do anything outside of being a defensive taunt. Maybe you could do some kind of fun meme stuff with what's that character who buffs up and makes your taunt attack in, the dwarf, Vandar. So maybe you could do some fun stuff with Vandar and him. I don't think I've seen anyone try that, but the big issue, he's a one-button merc, and the reason for that is because his other two abilities really are not that impressive. He has a generic attack with a death blow that you will almost never see go off because he only has 9 attack when maxed out, and there's not really a good way of upping the attack. You could go for Earthen Armor, but I mean, yeah, you get some extra stats. It buffs them to a 1990, and those are decent stats, but there just isn't enough Murloc support for like growing your Murlocs like there is in Standard, to where you're getting it big enough to actually get the death blow off. And even then, you're just gaining the attack. Usually, whatever you're killing will probably be a caster with lower attack anyway. So I just think that this could maybe do with a little bit more Murloc synergy. Perhaps even get rid of the death blow entirely. I get it's a little thematic, but maybe if you did something like buffing your other Murlocs or buffing all your Murlocs instead of a death blow, that could be kind of a nice way to support the tribe a little bit better. I think Scaly Taunt is fine. Devour. I think this ability is awful. It just does not see any type of play. You're taking a whole turn off to eat your lowest health Murloc and gain its stats. And I think this was designed this way because they wanted to be weary about, oh, well, you could eat another mercenary and make a really big mutanus. And that sounds like a kind of fun, silly idea, but it doesn't work at all. And this could be a 0 cooldown ability, and I still don't think it would see any play. I mean, maybe at 0, you start doing some combos with other Murlocs that can summon small Murlocs, and then you can eat them up. But even if that were the case, I think it would just be like maybe barely playable. Like, so I really wouldn't mind if they want to keep it this way. I'd say either drop it to 1, or if you actually want him to maybe see play, just get rid of the cooldown entirely. This is an ability I would like to see changed or reworked, though, because I just don't think it is. It's more thematic than actually interesting gameplay. And even though it's like unique and it makes sense for Mutanus, it's just like not. I don't think like killing your own Murloc seems like a very practical or fun thing to do. So I also wouldn't mind seeing this reworked as an entirely different skill. Maybe a summon, maybe just another ability that can give buffs to your other Murlocs or something. Because that's really what Murlocs are all about, is kind of buffing up the tribe. And it feels like they don't really have a whole lot of that going on for them in Mercenaries. He does have some other equipments that do synergize with that a little bit. After a Murloc dies, you gain some stats, but these are just so much more mediocre compared to this one, at least given the current uses for Mutanus, that they just aren't really worth running, because this equipment is just so much better if you're actually trying to protect with Mutanus. And speaking of protect, he should be a red. Mutanus should not be a green. I think it makes absolutely no sense why Mutanus is a fighter. He originally was a protector. That got changed at some point because Murlocs are more about fighters and casters, apparently. I don't really like that at all. I think he very clearly is a protector first, and I would really like to see him be changed to a protector, if nothing else. I think that would be a great change for him. So yeah, that's Mutanus. Moving on to another demon here, or Rathorian. So another demon. This is one where I just think this character really doesn't know what it's trying to like do. It's like trying to go in a bunch of different directions. Like, yeah, it has a summon, which isn't really that good. You get to attack the lowest health enemy. That can be a powerful ability, but like for a summon, it's just really, for a summon, especially with these stats, it's just not really that great. And it has a death blower. Hey, it can do it again. But given its low attack and low health, it's probably never going to be going off. It just, I don't see this ever happening. So I mean, you could remove the cooldown on this entirely, and I don't think it would still see any play. So maybe the best way to go about doing this would just be either buff up the stats a lot, or buff up the stats a little bit and remove the cooldown entirely. And maybe then you could see something with demons. Like, it would be cool if demons were kind of like a summon tribe that benefited from that, summoning a lot of demons. I think that would be really interesting. Blitzing Legion, attack an enemy, control another demon, deal 7 to a random enemy. I think this is fine for the most part. I think they could just up that damage. 7 is really low, and you could basically make this just a lot more damage because you really have to offset for that random. Random is traditionally very bad in Mercenaries. It takes a very big upside to make random be good, I find, kind of like Reno's death rattles. Like the pool is just generally so good and whatnot that you can get away with his other abilities also being random, because his best ability is not random. And given this is your main attack and your other two abilities start on cooldown, I think this should just have higher damage. Yeah, you can scale it up with fell damage, but it's really not that scary. I think it just makes more sense. If you want demons to be demon synergizing and doing more damage, that should just be at least, like, I think almost double the damage, if not more. Because 7 damage is just not nearly enough to be impactful. And the last skill, Fell Command, gain +5 attack, deal this merc's attack damage to an enemy. I think this one's fine as is. I don't think it really needs a buff. I think this is one you probably wouldn't want to be at 0 cooldown, because then you could just buff him up a ton. I don't think it would be inherently broken, but I think buffing up the other 2 skills is a more reasonable way to go about it. And then if you make him better by buffing up those other 2 skills, then I think this one would be fine to stay as is. Now, looking at the equipment, you can make the Hulking Overfiend have more attack, so you can make it a 2016. Really don't think that fixes the problem with it, though. It's still just a very mediocre summon, especially now that we have things like the N'Zoth summon and whatnot that are not taking damage as they swing in, because a lot of summons really aren't surviving super long unless you're in a very dedicated summon build. So I just think a lot of the other summons are even better than this, even with the equipment in account. So, I mean, maybe if you buff the summon itself, you can leave the equipment like this as is, but you probably don't need to touch the equipment. If you want to buff the summon, just buff the summon itself. Then this one, you can get some extra health. Again, I think that's fine for what this ability is doing. I don't think you really need to buff this one in particular to make the character much stronger. And then Demon's Mark, passive, whenever a friendly demon attacks, give it +5 attack. It's funny, this is actually basically the patches equipment, and we've seen that be very, very good. The tricky thing is, demons are not necessarily all about attacking. They're kind of a divided archetype, like we saw with Jaraxxus. Jaraxxus doesn't attack at all. So it's like, it's weird. Demons are kind of split between characters that care about like the stats and attacking, and then other characters that care about dealing the fell damage. And you get a little bit of the fell damage stuff with this one. Like this one, obviously he cares a little bit about both, but I think you could leave this equipment as is, and it's fine if you just buff up some of the other summons for the demons, or just the characters that are attacking. Like if you made Blitzing Legion a little bit better, then this would naturally be a bit better because you would be using this ability more often. So yeah, Blitzing Legion, Hulking Overfiend, those are the kind of skills I think would be best to adjust if you wanted to make this character a bit more playable. Then we have Morgul the Oracle. So another Murloc here, our second Murloc. This character has not seen play from the start. And when Cookie came out, it felt like Cookie just did everything this character wanted to do, but better for the most part. I mean, they weren't exactly the same, but it's just like the Murlocs that seem to care a lot about Murloc synergy just are pretty bad outside of, I think old Murkai is really the only good one for Murloc synergy. Murky's not bad either. He just hasn't seen play in Murloc builds because the other Murlocs don't provide enough support for that tribe to kind of get things going. So, looking at his abilities here, deal 10, give your other Murlocs +5 health. Honestly, this could probably be more damage. The fact that we have a Cookie Snipe at half this speed, and it's giving +15 to not just your Murlocs, but all your characters on Death Blow, is so much better than this. I think you either want to knock the speed down on this one, or if you want to leave it as is, you should pump up the damage and honestly pump up the health. Like, I think +10 health really wouldn't be that crazy, especially with how high damage is in Mercenaries right now. It wouldn't even be that crazy. Like, you don't need to give it a full Cookie Snipe, but this also limits it to the tribe. So I think that's fine if you're giving more health, because it's not like a blanket buff on all your mercenaries like the cookie snipe is, but it supports the tribe. And given how much damage is a lot higher than it was at launch for mercenaries, I think plus 10, plus 15 even might even be fine. I mean, we have Yulon now, who with the buff, they can basically do that every turn at 1 speed. And so I don't understand why this one has to be so low. That is definitely a change I would like to see. Like, maybe he can be the reason your Murlocs are surviving longer, but you really need to be giving more health to your Murlocs for that to happen. Fishy Barrage, deal 12 to a random enemy. Repeat for each of your other Murlocs. I think the cooldown on this can just go. 7 speed is incredibly slow. So right there, like, it's already not good for that reason. 12 damage really isn't that much damage. I mean, I guess it's balanced around the fact that you could have a lot of other Murlocs. Now we have some Murloc summons too, but even then, let's see, you have 2 other Murlocs. You're dealing 12 damage randomly 3 times. It's really not so great. I mean, maybe some more with summons, but then you're talking about like the most optimal, like, possible. And at 7 speed, those summons, there's a good chance they just die before this can even go off. So cooldown on this, I think, should just go entirely. And if you want to keep the damage where it's at with the randomness, I think the speed should also come down. I wouldn't mind seeing this at maybe 5 or even 4 speed. I think it would be totally fine at that level. So that's a change I'd like to see to Fishy Barrage, because again, the payoff, like, this is a payoff for having a bunch of Murlocs, and it's just a really bad payoff. So maybe if we make the payoff better, Murlocs can be a bit more viable. And then Healing Wave, restore 15 health. If the target has not acted yet, restore 30 health. This is another one. I think you could get rid of the cooldown on this entirely, and it still probably wouldn't see play. It's just, restoring health is a lot worse than other types of buffs, and the reason for that is because you can't overheal things in mercenaries, right? So if your thing hasn't taken damage, but you're worried about your opponent like focusing it down or something, sometimes they'll just be able to kill it before you can heal it, or the heal you give it isn't enough for it to actually make a difference. And so I think the bar for healing in mercenaries is really, really high for healing to be relevant. And this just is very clearly a launch healing skill. I was balanced around a very different power level. I think you could basically get rid of the cooldown. You could probably up the speed of this quite a bit to make it better. And then if you did that, probably leave the numbers about where they are. I think if you want to buff it that way, or if you want to leave it as is, you need to like significantly bump up the amount the healing is kind of giving the character. In terms of the items here, Murgle's Mitt, yeah, this makes all your characters get the health. Maybe this one could just give additional stats too or something, like maybe not only does it buff all your friendlies, but it also gives it more health, because 5 health is just pathetic. It's not doing anything. But that really would be kind of against what the Murloc synergy I would like to see is. So it'd be nice, but I don't think that would really help him see that much play. Then the Pufferfish, making the Fishy Barrage deal 4 more. I think this equipment's fine. Maybe you could make it deal a little bit more damage, maybe up it from 16 total to like 20 or something to give Murlocs a little bit more burst, I think would be fine. But I don't think that on its own would make it good enough. I do think you would still need to possibly remove the cooldown and up the speed a bit. And then Dowsing Rod, you can up the health here, so restore 25. If the target hasn't acted yet, restore 40. I think this equipment's fine if they made some other changes to Healing Wave, like dropping the cooldown to 0 and maybe lowering the speed just a little bit. So those are some changes I think would definitely help out the Murloc tribe and would make Murgle a bit more thematic in terms of being like kind of the big healer for the Murloc party and whatnot. And then last and probably least here, Manorath. So our last demon, this is a character I forget exists most of the time. He's just not good. He did get a very, very small buff a little while ago. The Howl of Terror, reducing the attack of all enemies and basically giving them, they lose stealth. That's not relevant. That's not coming up. It was when they just added that to some characters to kind of help out against Valeera, even though that didn't really do very much against Valeera. So yeah, looking at the abilities here, attack an enemy, give your demons +8 health. I think that's mostly fine. I wouldn't mind seeing a bit more health. Like, the demons feel very, very frail, and I think that feels weird from like a lore kind of perspective. Like, demons are these big, powerful characters. I mean, like, look at the art here. The dude looks jacked. Like, why is he like this frail, like, little character when he looks like huge and menacing and stuff? So I think this could give significantly more health. I think you could basically double this, like 15, 16 health, and I think it'd be fine. It would also give a lot more support to summons and demons, which I think they really do need that kind of support. And as we've seen, being able to do something like that every turn is quite powerful on things like Yulon, so giving it to an underpowered tribe like demons, I think would help them out quite a lot. Then we have Fell Lash, deal 10 to an enemy. It cannot heal this turn. The anti-healing abilities have been very, very fringe. I think they were kind of neat abilities and whatnot, and sometimes they do have their uses, but for the most part, it's not really that useful. So I think they could actually get away with upping the damage on that pretty significantly. I think at least to 15, if not higher. Just give him like a decent damaging attack that kind of encourages you to scale up that fell damage some more. And because you're not playing it generally for the it can't heal this turn, and that's just one turn. So it's like they could heal before you do that, and then it didn't even matter. Because force speed, while not slow, isn't exactly the fastest. So I think you could leave that on there. It's not going to make much of a difference. Maybe you could make it like the Galvangar one, where it can't heal for the next turn or something. But as is, I think it could do with a bit more damage. Then Howl of Terror, reduce the attack of all enemies by 15 this turn. They lose stealth. Honestly, I think you could remove the cooldown from this one, and it would be fine. It would give it kind of a... I think that would be really cool, actually, for demons, because it would give demons a way to quickly shut down attack. We've already seen something like this with the Cho battle cry, and that saw a little bit of play, but I think the attacking comps have so much raw damage that even if we were reducing their total attack or their attack of every one of their units by 15 for that turn, I don't even think it would be necessarily broken. It would just kind of act as like a decent check to some of those attacking comps, and that would give kind of demons a little bit of a purpose, right? Like, demons could scale themselves up and then make it harder for the opponents who are trying to directly attack in to deal damage to them. So maybe they could see a little bit of viability because of that as like an anti-attacker kind of comp. But as is, on one cooldown, it's just never seeing play. It's just not good. I don't know if I've ever used this ability outside of doing it in PvE for the tasks, so I would definitely like to see it cool down, just go away entirely on that ability. Looking at the items for him, Terror Charge gives an additional 5 health, so that actually buffs it up to similar what I was thinking before. I still wouldn't mind seeing the buff, so let's say if we did double this, so let's say it's... Well, what if we put it to, like, let's say 15, and then this could make it another 5, so it'd be like 20. So it'd be a bit better than Yulon, but is strictly only working on demons. 20 health is a lot, but I do think they really need to start giving these options to be a bit higher in terms of, like, health scaling, because the damage output is just so high. Sometimes mercenaries just die in one turn to critical damage. So I think if you want this kind of ability to work and see play, it needs to be doing more. And I still would like to see that change. Maybe you could just make the item have more health instead of adjusting the base ability. So it's kind of a trade-off. You have to like pick to use that item. Wouldn't mind seeing that. And then Fell Lash gaining some more damage. Kind of feel the same about this. I think you could up the base damage of Fellash and then just keep this equipment as it is. Maybe up the base to 15, so this bumps it up to 20, 21-ish, maybe even 22. I think it'd be totally fine. And then that gives you some potential for fell scaling stuff, because then you can make it even like crazier with some fell damage. So that could be pretty cool. And then last ability here, adding 5 damage to all enemies on the Howl of Terror. I think you could keep this one as is. 5 damage really isn't a lot, but if you want to keep this as is, you got to get rid of the cooldown. Cooldown is just very bad. I mean, maybe even you could even up this a little bit to 10 damage or something, and I still don't think it would be that great. So those are basically my ideas on what I would like to see for buffs for these characters. These are 2 tribes that I think have potential to be really cool. It's just so many members of these tribes just don't have high power and don't really have great support for the rest of the other tribe. They're trying to support the other tribe. It's just they suffer from launch mercenary syndrome, and they are not nearly powerful enough to compete with the characters we have now. So these are the buffs I'd like to see for them. So that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this one. Let me know in the comments below what you would like to see changed. Were there characters here I did not mention who you would like to see buffed? Do you have some different ideas for the characters we did talk about and how you'd like to see them changed? Let me know in the comments below. And that is going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, do remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.